Hey, what's up everybody? It's Izzy from PowerliftingToWin.com, and in today's program review we're going to be focusing on Brandon Lilly's The Cube Method. Now to be clear, I'm going to be focusing on the most recent release of his program, the Cube Boss, Cube Kingpin, Cube 365 Strong. I don't really know what the official name of the program is. I just know that 365 Strong is the most recent ebook release. Now, if you're interested in doing the Cube Method, you're probably going to want to snag a copy of 365 Strong for reference material. But I do have to warn you guys, the ebook is only 69 pages long, and half of it is just Brandon Lilly talking about his philosophy of life rather than actually giving you a lifting program. And just to give you a sneak peek of the rest of this video, I don't really like the program either. So in good conscience, I cannot recommend that you guys buy this book. So buy at your own discretion, guys. As always, we're going to start off with a little bit of context. Now, unlike so many of the other programs that we've looked at, the Cube Method was actually designed for powerlifting. So we're off to a good start. Brandon Lilly basically became fed up with over-reliance on powerlifting gear such as squat suits, bench shirts, etc. He became fed up with the ever-complicated, never-ending stream of different movements, bands, and chains that you use in the West Side Method. So in his own words, according to him, he returned to his roots and just simplified everything. So he designed the Cube as a response to his frustrations with Westside. So you'll notice that the program centers around the big compound barbell movements without really making use of bands and chains. Now, if you look closely at the program, you'll notice the Westside influences are still deeply embedded into it. But overall, this is a powerlifting program, and it comes from a guy with a Westside background. So let's dig into the program deeper here and see what it's all about. As you can see, the Cube Method is not the most straightforward program. In terms of basic structure, you have 1 day per week dedicated to each of the power lifts. A 4th training day is added where you employ bodybuilding style movements to address muscular weaknesses. The program is run in 3-week waves. Each week you rotate the type of work you do on each of the main movements. In week 1 you might do speed work for the squat. In week 2 you might do rep work. In week 3 you'd finish off with heavy work. During each training week, each lift is trained in a different style. That is, you never go heavy on 2 movements in the same week, nor do you ever do speed work on 2 main movements in the same week. Everything is rotated and waved throughout the 3 cycles. The program contains 3 3-week waves in all. Each wave reduces the volume a little bit and increases the intensity a little bit. Over time, you work your way from slightly higher volumes and slightly lighter weights to slightly heavier weights and slightly lower volumes. Because the Cube Method is an actual powerlifting program, it does contain a meet peak. In fact, the Cube is a 10-week cycle, and every 10-week cycle culminates in you going for new 1-rep maxes. So basically the way that the peak works is that from the first wave to the last wave, you use progressively heavier weights and progressively less volume. So by the time you get to the 3rd wave, you're really doing pretty heavy weights and not very much volume. Now, in meet week, you pretty much just deload. Let's take a look at what it looks like. As you can see, the last week before the meet is really simple on the Cube. You're basically just completely deloading. You take 30% of your 1-rep max and you do a couple sets at 8 on Monday and Thursday. On Tuesday, you do some pause benching at 75% for a handful of singles. Realistically, you're hardly training at all during this week, and the entire point is to deload and get you ready for that meet. For most people, this is going to be just fine as a peaking plan, especially considering that the last 3 weeks before this week really ramp you up towards heavier weights. Now, the Cube Method is periodized to some extent. The early waves of the program have more volumes than the later waves. However, if we're talking about training for specific qualities, the Cube Method actually employs concurrent periodization. Here's the thing, even though in each week you're training a separate quality for each lift, in the totality of each week, all qualities are trained simultaneously. And as we know, when you're trying to develop all qualities simultaneously, this is called concurrent periodization, and it's most appropriate for beginners. However, because the cube employs a 3-week period where for each lift it takes you 3 weeks to go through each of those physical qualities, it's really more appropriate for a late stage or advanced lifter to be using the cube. Because as we've learned, a novice or an early intermediate does not need 3-week long periods. And in fact, even an early intermediate doesn't need variations in volume from week to week. And the cube is going to feature variations in volume from week to week, wave to wave, and even lift to lift throughout the week. In terms of programming, just to reiterate the things I just touched upon, the program does feature variation in volume and intensity, not only from session to session, and not only from week to week, but it also features variation in volume and intensity from wave to wave, and each wave is a 3-week period. So realistically, this is a program that can be used profitably even by advanced lifters. In fact, like I said before, it's even most appropriate for them. However, a late stage intermediate is still going to get a lot out of the program because of the way that it uses concurrent periodization to train all of the physical qualities simultaneously. Now, in terms of the overall programmatic structure, this is a really typical old school American style powerlifting program. You're only doing each lift once per week, and most of the volume in the sessions come from the assistance movements that you do after the main lift. Again, this is very typical of old school American powerlifting program. The one thing you can't really knock the cube for is specificity. Unlike a lot of the other programs we've looked at, this one was actually designed for powerlifting. And most of the work that you do is on the power lifts, or at least close variants of the power lifts, like close grip bench press, deficit deadlift, block pull, Olympic squats, pause squats, and things of that nature. That said, if I was going to criticize the program for specificity, in my opinion, a little bit too much of the volume comes from those assistance variations rather than coming on the main movements themselves. And as is typical with literally almost every American program out there, in my opinion, it contains just a bit too much bodybuilding fluff. The thing is that American powerlifting culture is informed through bodybuilding. Most American powerlifters got their start through bodybuilding, and a lot of them just never dropped, the supersets and giant sets and gnarl monster sets for their lateral delts and the third head of the tricep and all of this stuff. In my opinion, this bodybuilding stuff is really just unnecessary. It does serve an important function as GPP, but it shouldn't be making up the bulk of the volume on your program. The cube method is your traditional percentage-based program, and so basically what that means is that all the workouts you do are a percentage of a max that you've done in the past. And at the end of every cycle, you're going to take a new max, and then your percentages for the next cycle are based on the new max. So you can see that everything is predetermined in advance. In terms of overload, the program simply increases the intensity from wave to wave. In fact, each of the days goes up 5% from wave to wave. Heavy day in wave 1 features 85% work. Heavy day in wave 2 features 90% work. And heavy day in wave 3 goes all the way up to 95%. And that's typical across the rep day, the explosive day, and the heavy day in the cube method. You just progressively add more weight, and this is your basic progressive overload. The cube method goes out of its way to ensure proper recovery. In fact, I would be surprised if anyone couldn't fully recover on this program. You know what? In my opinion, it actually goes too far with the fatigue management. Here's the thing, you're only doing one heavy lift per week, and you're only doing the lifts each once per week. So in my opinion, you're very unlikely to have recovery issues. And in fact, for most unenhanced lifters, they need more overall work than this. They need more volume than they can do in a single session. They need more frequency than one time per week. And in my opinion, the way that this program is structured, even though it's going to be great for fatigue management, you're never going to get too beat up, it's probably not enough for the non-enhanced lifter, in my opinion. Again, one time per week frequency is just not optimal. Now, while Brandon Lilly goes out of his way to recommend that on days where the weights feel light, you use more weight, and on days where the weights feel heavy, you take some weight off of the bar. He doesn't give you a way to systematize this. It's basically just the standard listen to your body advice. And as we all know, the listen to your body advice is great for experienced lifters. Experienced lifters know what that means. However, novices and intermediates really don't have any idea. So when you tell a lifter to listen to their body, basically what happens is that the intermediates just ignore you, and then the experienced lifters know what you're talking about and can benefit from it. For the intermediates out there, we need a way to systematize listening to your body. And that's really why I'm such a big fan of Mike Teixeira's reactive training systems. As far as I know, Mike's system is the only one out there that teaches you how to systematize autoregulation so that anyone can learn it and do it, even if they're an intermediate. So while it wouldn't be fair to say that Brandon Lilly's program ignores individual differences, particularly because it also uses rep ranges on some of the training days, at the same time, you can't give it a great rating in terms of individual differences because it doesn't show you how to auto-regulate. It just says that you should. Overall, the Cube is a fundamentally sound program. The fatigue management is in check, it doesn't ignore individual differences, it has appropriate periodization for late stage, intermediate, and advanced athletes, the progressive overload is in check, it's specific. So I'm sure some of you are confused then as to why I don't necessarily like this program. Well, the truth is this runs counter to my personal biases. Namely, it features 1 time per week frequency with most of the volume coming from assistance movements. Now, I'm aware that this is a highly effective strategy for many American powerlifters, but it just so happens that most of these American powerlifters are enhanced. They're guys who are using a lot of drugs. From my experience, just observing the top lifters, when you are unenhanced, you cannot get away with using 1 time per week frequency. You need more weekly exposures in order to master your technique. You need more overall sessions to get in the necessary volume to drive progress as an unenhanced lifter. You can't rely as much on anabolism. Now, this all said, overall, you really can't give the Cube anything less than a good rating because it covers all the bases. In fact, I would be surprised if you didn't make progress on the Cube. It's a solid program, I just don't think it's optimal. Next, we're going to tackle a juggernaut. The Juggernaut program, that is. Now, I've received a lot of requests for this program, and I'm ashamed to admit that I've never actually looked at it. Of course, I've heard of it before, but I don't actually know what it is. So I'm excited to do some research here, dig into it, and give you guys my opinion. Hopefully this review will be as interesting for all of you as it's going to be for me. As a brief note, guys, you will notice that I did re-enable the YouTube comments. I received a lot of feedback from you guys, and most of you were pretty upset that I disabled them and that I wasn't responding to them anymore. And I just want you to know that I take those opinions very seriously, and as such, we will be responding to the YouTube comments on the Powerlifting to Win YouTube channel. So if you guys want to talk here, you can. Now that said, I do highly encourage you to check out the Powerlifting to Win forums, as that way I can give you a more well thought out, detailed response, and it's just a lot easier to find information in a forum setting than it is in YouTube comments. YouTube comments are just kind of a giant sea, and things get lost in there. If you found this content interesting, informative, or entertaining, please like, share, send it out into the interwebs for me, subscribe if you haven't already, and don't forget to check out PowerliftingToWin.com for more great powerlifting information. Have a nice day.